outside of my industry, but super relevant to all of us, is in education. So there's a TED Talk that just recently came out with Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, whose mission it is to provide a world-class education for free to anybody in the world, depending on, how you consider world-class, et cetera. I think we can all agree that Khan Academy has done some amazing things. And there's been some studies done in education, again, it's not my field of expertise, but there's been some studies done in education that if you were to provide one-to-one tutoring with each student, we would see increases in productivity in terms of educational performance that are, 2 standard deviations away from what we have for that same sample size of students today. So quite considerable in terms of improvement capability, but quite impossible in terms of economics. How do we have a tutor for every single student that exists out in our ecosystem? So one of the things that they're putting out in their service is they're putting out the capability for each student to have a digital tutor. And one of the things that they want to put out in the education system is the capability for each teacher to have a virtual co-pilot co-teacher, right? And so again, it really boils down to the question in terms of, well, how do you build the models, and how do you train the model, and how do you govern the model, and how do you look at things like, authenticating in the right people, and what's a right answer or wrong answer, but the productivity opportunities are just, you can't ignore the opportunity, right? Within the manufacturing space, there's so many opportunities when you think about the design of a product. When you talk to manufacturers, it's all about, well, how do we launch product to market rapidly and get a return on all of this capital that we spend designing a product and then procuring raw materials and making the product and holding it in inventory and then waiting to sell it. That return on that capital and that value chain is something that they're always looking at. How do we shorten? So the ability to have an engineering co-pilot alongside an engineer to help an engineer go through a rapid and vast amount of simulations around product design. How will the product be higher quality, lower price, better performance in any industry? There are just some amazing opportunities when it comes to the design. When you look at production lines, there are amazing opportunities for the managers in production lines to look at simulations of their production lines and to get digital advice in terms of how to optimize production lines. So the opportunities are known and they're vast. It's really how do we start to apply these opportunities to real life scenarios, which I think is going to be the challenge. And so, another real life example of this, coming to market right now is in semiconductors. So you might be all aware that there was a Chips and Science Act that the Biden administration put through, which is funding just a huge wave of the next wave of semiconductor manufacturing here in the US. And so you see plants going in to Ohio and Arizona, and there'll be plenty of opportunity here in Southern California to feed these ecosystems through distribution and parts, et cetera. As these manufacturers think about retooling and modernizing in the US, not just porting over what they do today, it's all about how do I take what a PhD can do, and let's say Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing, and have somebody with a master's degree or a bachelor's degree do the same type of work with the help of a digital assistant in a more modern environment, right? So again, I think the opportunities are vast, they're identifiable, they're super exciting, right? But there's a lot of discussion, how do we start, how do we govern, and how do we just kind of channel this energy in the right direction.
Fantastic. You're talking about like co-pilots and, obviously training of these models all requires data. And say we're talking about, the scenario of talking about a teacher having a co-pilot and assistant. I can only imagine like if you're dealing with minors, that, that data set is obviously really, sensitive. Mandy, like when it comes to cybersecurity, like all these different, there's troves and troves of data, right, that's out there that people are modeling, people are scraping off of websites. But when you come to like larger corporations where this is proprietary data, how are we, how are these larger corporations or even universities or even like LA Unified School District, right, which has had some cyber attacks in the past, how are we going to start protecting these data sets and be able to really have a strong firewall to make sure that, yes, we are getting the benefits we need from these AI agents, but it's not being leaked out to some other third party?
Yeah, so we first need someone to govern AI, right? And understand who that's going to be. I think Los Angeles has some obligations to that too as we start to use it. We know that our schools are going to start using AI. Who is responsible when we hand these programs to students? is the school district responsible for what these kids find out. We need to use technology to make sure that the students are getting the data sets they need. This needs to be third-party regulated as well, so we need to have auditors come in and make sure that the system's doing what it's supposed to be doing. We have this throughout technology and anything we do. NIST 853 governs basically anything, healthcare, education, everything that we have is based off of those standards. But those standards are made for what we have now in technology, not what's to come. And what we saw with NIST was, it was about 10, 15 years behind where it needed to be to get that regulation in place. So I think it's really important now that we start thinking ahead. Well, we're already behind, right? But getting that into place now. And understanding the ethics, it's something that we haven't really dove into as much as we'll see. We see a lot of biases coming with AI. We see a lot of inputs. I was on a project where we were putting in resumes, and it turns out that there's a bias in resumes that got into the system. White men's resumes were popping up as the A+ every time. So if you bias in, you've got to have bias out. So it's really important that we govern those biases early on because, as Al said, the machine keeps learning and it's going to learn what you told them. It's also going to make you a little bit more and more biased when your feed keeps coming with what you've been thinking, right? And keeps telling you how right you are. So these are things that we have to start governing now.
Jump in, everyone. I don't want to keep this. But if we go into talking more about, okay, so we're talking about, you need to be covering data sets that have all these different biases, and it's just inherent that every data set has some type of bias, right? You're never going to get them all out of the set. So how is one being able to clean these data sets, and how do we even have this governance policy? Like, is there a one rule that rules them all? Like there's different groups. I think Microsoft has their principles. Every organization has their own type of stance on this. Open table, whoever wants to talk. How do us, right, civilians to people that are working in industry, really get ahead of this? I mean, how do we get ahead of really actuating this?
So I think I completely agree. I mean, it's really important that companies have these sort of ethics policies out there and very transparent. It's something that a lot of companies don't even think about. I think there's a lot of companies that don't think about the privacy policy. Like when you go to ChatGPT, go read their privacy policy. Who gets access to the data? It's different if you use ChatGPT versus their regular models as to how they can use that data. Going back to the other question, I mean, with ChatGPT and all these other models, if you just use it straight out of the box, it's going to be biased, it's going to give inaccuracies, it's going to have all these issues. And I think part of it's going to be providing data that trains it further so it could be on brand for your company. But you still need to have the human in the loop. I think that's what you forget. It's like there has to be someone looking at this content and have the critical thinking skills to realize, yes, this is right, this is wrong, no, this shouldn't go out there. So, I mean, at StoryFile, we use these sort of generative AIs as a tool to help train the interactions and to guide the interviews, but ultimately there's a real human in front of a camera who is providing the lesson. Like it would be a professor at the university who is talking through their lesson plan. The AI might help them come up with a lesson plan, but it's there, in the end, they're the one with the authenticity on the line. And I think we just have to make sure we have that human there throughout the process.
So I'd like to give a really good example of that, so thank you for that, Val, because very appropriately, right, there has to be a human in the rule. It's a tool, and a lot of people are excited because this tool can do amazing things that the average human can't do. However, there are people working on the ethics end of it. I'm in meetings with a few people at IBM, with Experience U, it's an education group, and one of the projects that we're working on is where we interviewed incarcerated persons. And I asked them, because we want to make sure, right, they're protected, they're a vulnerable population, and no folks, this is not research, right, but we were talking to them, helping them develop career models for when they leave out. And so we asked, wait, hold on, you said you're incarcerated, do you want that information included in this interview? And they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. And after several people said, yeah, no problem, I asked, I'm like, are you aware of what AI is? what it does with the information, how this happens? And they said, no, every one of them. So then we went back and we asked them again. Now that you understand this a little better, would you like your information included? Shall we? And they were absolutely not. All right, and so I think that as we're approaching this tool, there has to be a person involved. It is a tool, just like a shovel can't shovel by itself. We need to collectively, and I think that goes back a little bit to the question of how do we kind of pull some of that bias out? By having a lot of people in the room, right? A lot of communities, making sure that it's not just the techs at the top, right, in this one room where they're training it based on what they know and what they've been taught at very elite, in some cases, schools, but everyday students. I teach my students coming in, work smart, not hard. And then we tell them, but don't use the tools at your availability, that are available to you. And so I think that's really the answer, right? Keeping people in the loop and making sure that there are a variety of people in the room, not just the tech folk. And that's great, right? We're here and we're leading to some extent, but the education folk and the community-based organizations and the students. These are the young people who are going to be running this world one day. We need to have them involved right now, building the world that they want to live in, because Gen Z is amazing folks, right? Let's let some Gen Z folks handle it. And I think we'll stay in a good place, a better place with tech than we have been before.
Amazing. I mean, we were talking about earlier about like the digital divide and like how hard it is for some populations that don't even understand how to go and use the internet or how to have an email account. And things that most of us probably all take for granted, right? We understand how to turn on a computer and have an email account, but there's definitely different populations out there where that is there's not no access. They have no access to the device itself or even the internet. And so what my biggest concern is, based off what you're talking about, is that AI literacy component. For people that are reading about this and are now it's unfortunate there's so much fear mongering out there. You look at these different headlines, or even a Time magazine's cover that just came out, and it's about like how AI is going to destroy society and humanity. And it's just not really true if you go talk to the research or you listen to the researchers and all. I don't actually go get to talk to these people, but when I read about what they're talking about, it's like it's so far-fetched right now, right? But they're seeing that it's kind of being politically driven. And at the end of the day, take out all the politics, take out everything, we need to deal with the humans. And how are we going to start deal with all populations understanding what AI is and isn't? And I would feel like, right, the work that you're doing, developing these different training programs, maybe you can speak a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So part of the work that I'm doing is with a grant from the National Telecommunications Information Agency, Information Administration. And we are trying to close the digital divide by not only providing computers and access, right, internet connectivity in the community, but providing training materials, doing community-based courses, classes, right? So a trusted partner. And we at DH, we are a trusted partner. They know the school's not going anywhere, right? We're gonna be there for a long time to come. Their children and grandchildren and so forth will go to this school like their parents and grandparents did. So that's a trusted partner, we're there. But having that information in those community trainings, we can open up training for a person who's never touched a computer before, open the box, show them the chat, right, and say, ask the question that you have. They're not, right, it removes that sense of judgment sometimes. The people who don't know things, they don't wanna ask, they don't wanna look stupid, they don't wanna feel like I should know this. So I love this idea of the personal tutor, and I think that this is how we can use this tool in this moment to the best of its ability, is to close the digital divide. Let's put this very simple tool into the hands of folks, teach them a few things about prompt creation, right? How do you get the answer when you don't know the question that you're asking? So help them along a little bit by giving them access. A lot of people have said, oh, but you're not gonna need AI, you're gonna need basic literacy. Well, that is basic literacy. It's a prompt, it's critical thinking. How do you ask a question? So let us put the tools into the hands of the people who need it and provide access now without our judgment, whether they're sophisticated or trained enough to understand. I use it, I understand a lot, but I can tell you, I don't understand all the algorithms that make it do what it does, and I still can use it effectively. So who are we to keep anyone from the tools that are here to be provided for the use of the community, right? So let's train community centers. Let's train the folks at the nursing homes. Let's train people who are in, I think we were just at the digital literacy meeting, right? And they were talking about all these different communities in the homeless shelters, right? Got a question? Go ask, right? And there's less intimidation, more access, right? But it's certainly gonna take the people to help bridge that gap between the technology of today and our future.
I just have one thing on that. I think this sort of diversity and accessibility also needs to be on the other side of the coin, on the people building these models, because it's really, really important that whether it's Microsoft or these other companies who are building these models, hire a wide range of people to be building the models and building those experiences. They're not just going to be computer scientists. They're going to be people coming from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of experiences, so that they can talk to these things, identify these biases early on in the process. The other thing that we're seeing a lot is the sort of democratization of training models. Like, you don't necessarily need to have a supercomputer to train a new language model, and it's scaring, like the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, that everyone can sort of build a model. It's scary because you could train it for good or for evil, but it's something that anyone, if you're a reasonable computer, can go and dive into this and start doing it. You don't have to have a supercomputer.
How, I guess, wearing your Microsoft hat, tell us more a little bit. I mean, obviously, you have a big investment with OpenAI, and everyone gets to use GPT, and now it's even in you have Clyde Sydney, that's in your Bing apps. I guess you could tell a little maybe more about like your viewpoint on how everyday people can be learning and how we're going to be using AI and maybe furthering AI literacy type programs.
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing come to market through our partnership with OpenAI is this concept of a co-pilot, right? And so in my space, that's starting off with everything we're doing, let's say with developers, there's this concept of co-pilot with developers, and then you're starting to see that some of these capabilities start to populate themselves into basic applications, like Outlook and PowerPoint and Excel, where as you're just doing basic productivity work, in our tools, you'll start to be prompted, by this personal assistant per se that's intelligent and helpful and can give you prompts. But I do think that it really will boil back really, really quickly to some of the things that we're talking about in terms of governance, right? And so I think that companies that really have robust programs today around standards of business conduct, security, diversity and inclusion. I think companies that have put a lot of thought into those programs in terms of how do we think about hiring, how do we think about career development, how do we think about training, or how do we think about just basically creating the conversation internally and then within the ecosystem, internally and externally, so that creates kind of a psychological safety to continue the conversation into things like product development, right? So I think, from a Microsoft perspective, I think where we're excited about the partnership is, obviously the capabilities of OpenAI and the capabilities that you see as a consumer of ChatGPT, but we're also thinking and hoping that a lot of the work that we've done in the past 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years in terms of things like growth mindset and culture within the company, culture within the ecosystem, be a learn-it-all of new capabilities versus kind of a know-it-all, et cetera. And then obviously ingraining a lot of those concepts like, company values and standards of business conduct, diversity and inclusion, kind of ingraining those into the way that we work and think and interact with each other inside the company and the ecosystem. We're hoping that the combination of the two will really ignite something in the marketplace that's really super productive, right? And again, I just go back to my own industry, the opportunities for productivity and for better use of capital and for opening up roles to a broader set of potential employees for hiring, those capabilities are there, they're identifiable, they're exciting, right? So it's really all about how quickly can we apply the technology to those capabilities. And that's where having a little bit of a head start on some of those governing factors. And again, security, same thing. I think really being able to having a robust security policy that allows for a lot of thought in terms of securing the perimeter and your applications and your data, and then the authentication of users or devices that are intelligent, that are providing information. The more robust we are in terms of governing, I think those companies, those universities, those entities that have a head start there will continue to have a head start in terms of these productivity gains.
Thinking about being in college and graduating this year. Economic downturn, there's all these layoffs across all these different companies that you thought maybe I would get a job there. AI is taking over the world. And all those last 4 years, or if you're a community college, 2 years, those last few years, right? You never were taught anything about how to use AI in your daily life, whether it's from your personal life or even within your daily, educational career, or even how you would use that in the workforce, right? And so with all that, and I think it's really exciting for anyone going to college right now, because now I feel like everyone has a policy about how you're going to be using GPT, how there's going to be, these, hopefully not going to be caught plagiarizing, right? But how you're going to be using these tools to continue your critical thinking skills, which is super important these days. Obviously, the thing about when calculators first came out, and I didn't think you needed to know, your multiplication tables, but you still pretty much do. But now we have these supercomputers in our hands. But now we have ChatGPT in our pockets too, or Sydney in here. So anyways, what do we think about how AI is going to be utilized within the education systems? If open question to anyone about today going into a university or a community college.
Well, I'd like to challenge the idea that universities have policies in place. That's not necessarily true. We have ideas, but a lot of people don't understand what it does. I mean, a lot of faculty are terrified. One of my daughters came home from school and said, our teacher said anyone using ChatGPT will get failed. Right? Because she doesn't believe, right? So now we have one individual gatekeeping the learning of a tool, so that student is going to be, right, that whole class, anyone she teaches is going to be removed at least one step from that tool. And then I'd like to challenge the idea that using ChatGPT is plagiarism, because you have to actually put something in to get something out. And what you put in is your original thought. So I use Grammarly. I use, so many tools. Many of you use Tableau to make pictures out of your data. These are tools. So why would we not allow the use of a tool to do what tools do? And so for me, I'm a little challenged with the concept of plagiarizing when you have to initiate the conversation. Because I had an editor for my dissertation, right? Like somebody can come and help you, and why isn't this tool allowed to be helpful? So I think the real challenge is getting understanding in institutions of higher education that are not just in the computer science department and the IT departments or in those genre of learning. I think the real challenge will be educating the educators so that we don't gatekeep in a way that's inappropriate for our community in particular. At Dominguez Hills, we have a very sensitive population. There's already lack of access. No, we cannot further perpetuate that. That's what's going to keep everyone from enjoying the benefits of this tool. So compliance, yes. Security, yes. Access, absolutely.
Yeah, I think equity is the best thing that
Best thing
AI
that
is
can
gonna
happen.
give us, right? But I have a son graduating next year, he's in his senior year of college, and what an amazing time, right? You're gonna walk into somewhere like Deloitte as an analyst, you're gonna have this tool, this built-in tutor to help you get through those first assignments. Yes, you cannot have it write a proposal for you, that's not what it's meant to do. You can ask it questions that you used to go ask another human or a manager. You can get some background and then go ask your manager and come with an intelligent question, right?
Yes.
Instead of going, I don't know, this is really stupid. Well, work through the stupid part, right? And make sure you get but get to your manager. I mean, mean, I remember I graduated USC, and I was the first class at SC to have email. It was like such a big thing. I was on the chair, right? And it was like, oh my goodness, and I was in engineering, so we got it for free. Everybody else had to pay, all those kinds of things, right? But it was like, oh, what are you going to do? Computers are going to take over. Still plenty to do. Like, what an amazing opportunity to be at the cusp of all of this and get those jobs and start your work at this time. I think these kids are just going to do amazing things with AI.
I think the thing that's sort of amazing about the AI and now is it's becoming more and more conversational. I think that's the sort of key word that if you think of how we learn fundamentally, it is by having conversations with people. I mean, going back thousands of years. So as AI is becoming more conversational, it becomes more accessible for more and more people to use it, as long as you know how to have an intelligent conversation. Not everyone does, but you talk intelligently to it, hopefully it will talk intelligently back. Now specifically, if someone out there was in the computer science department right now and they were graduating, there are certain things I would recommend that they do. I mean, you still need that core basis in math and statistics. That's going to become really, really important. Knowing a little bit of how you code, like learning Python or something like that, some basic scripting, is getting even more accessible for anyone. I mean, now, like my nephews who are like 8, 9, 10, they're going to be learning how to code like at a much younger age. And all of these tools are going to make coding and programming even more easier because he can go out and he can read that big giant manual on how to use a big API and help you write your code. And that is going to be really exciting to see how people learn to code and learn to, with these sort of co-pilots in their backseat, helping them out all the way every step of every step.
Yeah, I agree on the just the democratization of skill sets that used to be pretty challenging, like developing. I think the ability to kind of bring really deep development down to more elementary level. We're going to get a lot more people in the ecosystem that can produce, which I think is great. It's funny. I have 3 boys, and one just graduated college. I have 2 in. So on top of being extremely financially strapped right now, I'm getting a lot of different feedback around ChatGPT in schools. But I've got one son who's a pretty good writer. He can, read, talk, listen, create his outline, write his paper, turn it in, and he's fine. I've got another son who struggles at writing, but he's a pretty gifted orator. I mean, trust me, when he wants a loan or to use the car, he's pretty skilled in making his point, right? So the ability for someone like him, to get a head start on his outline, I think why not, right? I mean, he's a really critical thinker. He's got a lot to say and a lot to produce, and he's always been stuck with how do I put together an outline, And my youngest son, who's up at UC Santa Cruz, he told me he had a professor that actually gave an assignment that said, drop this question into ChatGPT and then get your answer and take that, write an outline, write a paper, and then come to me and sit one-on-one and argue your point, in person without any prompt, and let's see how you do. So I think it'll create change, and I'm not an educator, but looking at my children's experience, for my one son who struggles to make an outline, that skill set will become more democratized. So my older son who had that capability and always got good grades, that's no longer an advantage. He'll have to compete with my middle son now, who's a great orator, pretty skilled, and now he has an outline help, right? So I think it'll create change, and it'll take skill sets that might have been differentiating in the past and drop them down, but also provide opportunity to a greater number of people, which I think is exciting.
And I think it's important. I mean, that's not cheating. That's having available parents, right? Which many of our kids had, but other kids do not. I sat down with my kids, okay, let's do an outline, right? Or, okay, let me do some grammar check for you. It's just having that so you can cook dinner while someone else is helping them with some of those activities.
So really interesting. My daughter is graduating next year, actually, with a computer science degree, and she can code Python. But the only reason she's in the computer science major is Minecraft. You all know Minecraft, right? She built mods and all of these things, and I had no idea. It's a video game to me, right? No idea. And I think that that's really these opportunities, right? Let them have access, and then they will help. That access will help people see the opportunities, right? So I love that story, and I'm just gonna push back here. We are all educators. Every time we step out to come and talk to people and share our thoughts, take our kids through an outline or, right, the negotiation on, no, you're not getting that extra money, or the part of it, right? We're all educators, and I think it becomes all of our responsibility then to share what we know. So, right, we had new staff, thank you for coming, and of course, right, there's this onboarding process with new staff. Well, now I can give our new staff notes and say, by the way, this prompt will help you 80-20. There you go, right? And it's cut that in time. I don't work in HR, but I have to, as a manager, write job descriptions. Not anymore, 3 days of my time. Now it takes me 20 minutes to generate, right? A tool. Again, if we remember that the threat is not the AI, it's the people, right? Creating boundaries and boxes and deciding who gets to do what where, that's more problematic, I believe, than the AI.
One other thing I want to add is, I think the challenge is that how do we encourage creativity while we're doing it so it doesn't become reliant on it. And I think some of my favorite examples where people try to teach people to use ChatGPT is they try to do something that is impossible or something that's really hard. Because when you're faced with something that's impossible, that's like, oh, I have to be creative to how to encourage it. So like, there's a famous example like, how do you get ChatGPT to write pickup lines? How do you get ChatGPT to like give flavors of ice cream? And like if you give someone a creative problem to solve, then they can't just rely on it, and they're gonna have to be forced to develop that creativity and
So it writes
thinking.
limericks for me.
So
I
it's
wrote
amazing.
myself a song on ChatGPT. I mean, it's fun, and right, it doesn't have to be scary. It really is fun. And how do we teach and make it accessible and not so frightening? I think is a really big challenge. And my only solution that comes to my mind with my limited experience and all the disclaimers that should probably come before this statement is, let us see with the best of the integrity of the human race, what we can do. I think that's where the creativity is going to come in, because humans are pretty incredible when they want to be. And so I think let us go forth and right as Star Trek, make it so, and go and do the things. And again, engage the full spectrum of our community in that. That's why I love that it's in Bing, right? Like you just go there, or wherever, right? Wherever you happen to go. I love that it's just so open and accessible that as soon as we can get you connected and online, if you want to go explore, then by all means, ask ChatGPT what are the 5 best prompts to ask ChatGPT. So I think, right, people are creative, right? If I can, you know, I talk teacher mode, sorry, but right.